When I won $37 million in the lottery, my daughter and son-in-law showed up at my door with their furniture. "We're moving in, and we'll help you spend the money." I agreed. A week later, as I entered the house, a homeless man grabbed me and said, "Don't go in there. I heard something terrible." Subscribe to the channel for more stories like this and comment the city you're watching from. I'm 64 years old, and I never believed in miracles until that Tuesday morning when I checked my lottery numbers for the third time, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the ticket. $37 million. The numbers stared back at me like they were mocking an old fool who'd spent his retirement checks on false hope for years. My name is Jacob, and I've been alone for so long that talking to myself became normal conversation. My wife, Margaret, passed 8 years ago, and since then, this house has felt more like a museum than a home. The silence was so thick you could cut it with a knife. I'd call Violet, my daughter, maybe once a month, but our conversations were always strained, like we were strangers reading from a script neither of us wanted to perform. She lived 3 states away with her husband, John, and honestly, I couldn't remember the last time she'd visited. Maybe Margaret's funeral, but even then, she'd stayed for barely 2 hours, checking her phone the entire time like she had somewhere more important to be. It hurt, but I'd learned to swallow that particular pain years ago. So when I won the lottery, the first thing I felt wasn't joy. It was panic. Who do you call when something this big happens and you have nobody to share it with? I sat in my kitchen staring at that ticket, and for the first time in years, I cried. Not because I was happy, but because I realized how truly alone I was. 3 days later, I was still trying to wrap my head around the whole thing when I heard a truck pulling into my driveway. I looked out the window and couldn't believe what I was seeing. A moving truck followed by Violet's silver Honda. My heart started pounding so hard I thought I might have a heart attack right there. I opened the front door as Violet stepped out of her car, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the 6-hour drive. John emerged from the passenger side, tall and lean with that practiced smile he always wore around me. Behind them, 2 men were already unloading furniture from the truck. "Dad!" Violet called out, her voice bright and cheerful in a way I hadn't heard in years. She practically ran toward me, arms outstretched, and for a moment, I was so stunned I just stood there like a deer in headlights. When she hugged me, it felt different, tighter, longer, like she actually meant it. I couldn't remember the last time my daughter had hugged me with such enthusiasm. "What's all this?" I asked, gesturing toward the moving truck where men were carrying a couch toward my house. John stepped forward, extending his hand with that firm grip he'd perfected. "Jacob, we heard about your incredible news. Congratulations, you deserve every penny." I shook his hand, still confused. "I don't understand. What are you doing here?" Violet took my arm, guiding me toward the house as the movers continued their work. "Dad, we've been talking, and we realized how selfish we've been. Here you are, starting this new chapter of your life, and you shouldn't have to navigate it alone. We want to help," John added, supervising as the men carried in what looked like a dining room set. Managing that kind of money, making smart decisions, it's a lot for anyone. We think it's time we moved closer to family. I felt something inside my chest that I hadn't felt in years. Hope, maybe even happiness. My daughter wanted to be close to me. After all these years of distance, of brief phone calls and forgotten birthdays, she was here. "You want to move in?" I asked, my voice probably betraying how desperately I wanted them to say yes. "If you'll have us," Violet said, and when she smiled, she looked just like her mother did when we were young. "We've been thinking about it for months, even before your windfall. John's work has been stressing him out, and I've been feeling so disconnected from family." John nodded. This seemed like the perfect opportunity for a fresh start. "And honestly, Jacob, Violet has been worried about you living alone in this big house." The movers were bringing in more furniture now, a bedroom set, boxes marked kitchen supplies, and what looked like John's golf clubs. This wasn't a temporary visit. They'd planned this. "I don't know what to say," I admitted, watching my daughter direct the movers where to put their things. "Say yes, Dad," Violet said, taking my hands in hers. "Let us take care of you for once. You've carried so much alone since Mom died. It's our turn to help." That night, after the movers had left and we'd ordered pizza like some kind of normal family, I sat in my living room looking at my daughter and son-in-law arranging their belongings among mine. Violet was hanging up pictures of their life together, and John was setting up his laptop on what used to be Margaret's writing desk. "This feels good," Violet said, settling onto their new couch next to John. "Doesn't it feel good, Dad?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. It did feel good. For the first time since Margaret died, the house felt alive again. There were voices, movement, the sounds of other people living their lives. I'd forgotten how much I missed that. "We should talk about practical things," John said, opening his laptop. "The money, I mean. Have you thought about how you want to manage it?" "Not really," I admitted. "It's still so new." "Well, we have some ideas," Violet said, moving to sit on the arm of my chair. "John has experience with investments, and I've been reading about tax implications. We could help you make some smart decisions." The way she said it, so caring and concerned, made my chest warm. My daughter was looking out for me. After years of feeling like I'd failed as a father, like I'd somehow lost her along the way, here she was wanting to help. "I'd appreciate that," I said. "I never was good with money. Your mother always handled all that." "That's what family is for," John said, and when he smiled, it almost looked genuine. As I got ready for bed that night, I could hear them talking in low voices in the guest room they'd claimed as their own. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone sounded serious. Planning. I figured they were probably discussing how to help me, what investments might be smart, how to make sure I didn't waste this incredible gift. For the first time in 8 years, I fell asleep to the sound of other people in my house. It should have been comforting, and part of it was, but there was something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on, a feeling that things were moving faster than I could keep up with. But I pushed that thought away. My daughter was here. My family was finally complete again. What could possibly be wrong with that? The first week was like living in a dream I'd had for years, but never thought would come true. Violet cooked breakfast every morning, real breakfast with eggs and bacon and fresh coffee that didn't taste like it had been sitting in the pot for hours. John helped me organize my paperwork and seemed genuinely interested in hearing my stories about the old days. But it was the small things that meant the most. When I'd get up in the middle of the night, there were lights on in other parts of the house, sounds of life. When I came home from my daily walk to the corner store, there were cars in the driveway and voices inside calling out hello when I opened the door. "Dad, sit down," Violet said one morning, setting a cup of coffee in front of me. "John and I have been talking, and we think it would be smart to get your financial situation organized properly." John spread some papers across the kitchen table. Bank statements, investment brochures, legal documents I didn't recognize. "The Lottery Commission has been calling about the payout options. We need to make some decisions." I looked at the papers, but honestly, most of it was like reading a foreign language. Numbers and percentages and terms I'd never bothered to learn. "What do you think I should do?" "Well," John said, adjusting his glasses, "there are several options. You could take the lump sum, which would be about $22 million after taxes, or you could take annual payments over 30 years. Which is better?" I asked. Violet sat down next to me, her hand on my shoulder. "We think the lump sum makes more sense. That way we can invest it properly, make it grow. John has connections with some excellent financial advisors." "You trust John's judgment," I said, looking at my son-in-law. "Absolutely," John replied. "I've been researching investment strategies specifically for lottery winners. There are ways to minimize tax burden and maximize growth if we move quickly." Something about the way he said "we" made me pause, but Violet squeezed my shoulder. "Dad, we're family. Your success is our success. We just want to make sure you're taken care of." That afternoon, while Violet was at the grocery store, I was reading in the living room when I heard John on the phone in their bedroom. His voice was low, but the walls in this old house were thin. "No, it's going exactly as planned," he was saying. "He's completely trusting, doesn't question anything we suggest." I set down my book, straining to hear more. "The paperwork should be ready by next week. Once we have power of attorney for financial decisions, we can move faster." Power of attorney? I didn't remember discussing that. Maybe I'd misunderstood what he was talking about. "Violet's got him wrapped around her finger," John continued. "She's playing the devoted daughter perfectly. He's so desperate for family connection, he'd probably sign anything we put in front of him. My chest tightened. Had I heard that right? Playing the devoted daughter? John's voice got even quieter. Look, the timeline needs to be realistic. We can't rush this too much or he might get suspicious, but we also can't wait forever. The longer we're here, the more chance there is of complications. I heard footsteps on the stairs and quickly picked up my book, pretending to read. John appeared in the doorway a few minutes later, smiling that practiced smile. Good book? He asked. Yeah, just passing time, I replied, hoping my voice sounded normal. When Violet came home, she was carrying bags from an expensive department store along with the groceries. I picked up a few things, she said, showing me a designer purse and some jewelry. I hope you don't mind. I used your credit card. I figured with all this money, you wouldn't mind treating your daughter to a few nice things. I hadn't given her my credit card. I looked at her confused. How did you get my card? You left it on the kitchen counter yesterday, she said, her tone light and casual. I thought you meant for me to use it. Was I wrong? No, of course not, I said quickly, not wanting to seem petty. I just didn't remember leaving it there. Dad, you're getting older. It's normal to forget little things like that, Violet said, giving me a concerned look. That's another reason John and I think you could use help managing things. That evening, as we sat down for dinner, I noticed they'd changed the seating arrangement. Now they sat on one side of the table, and I sat alone on the other. It was subtle, but it felt significant somehow. We had some good news today, John announced, cutting into his steak. I heard back from the financial advisor I mentioned. He's very interested in taking you on as a client. That's wonderful, I said, though I felt uneasy about decisions being made without me being involved in the conversations. He suggested we meet next week to discuss strategy, Violet added. You'll need to review all your assets, current investments, insurance policies, that sort of thing. I don't have any current investments, I said, just my pension and Social Security. Well, that's about to change dramatically, John said with a laugh. You're going to need professional help managing this kind of wealth. After dinner, I was washing dishes when I heard them talking in the living room. Their voices were low, but I could make out some of the conversation. He's more trusting than I expected, Violet was saying, almost too easy. That's good for us, John replied. The last thing we need is him asking too many questions or wanting to involve outside people. Do you think he suspects anything? Violet asked. Not yet, but we need to be careful. Old people can be unpredictable when they start feeling cornered. Old people? The way she said it with such dismissiveness made my stomach turn. Is that how my daughter saw me? Just an old person to be managed? How long do you think this will take? Violet continued. If everything goes smoothly, we should have full control within a month or two. After that, it's just a matter of waiting for the right opportunity. Waiting for what opportunity? I dried my hands slowly, trying to process what I was hearing. I still think we should consider the faster approach, Violet said, her voice dropping even lower. Too risky, John replied. The slow way is safer, less suspicious. I heard footsteps and quickly turned back to the sink, scrubbing an already clean plate. Violet appeared in the kitchen doorway. Dad, you don't need to do dishes. That's what I'm here for, she said, taking the plate from my hands. I don't mind, I said. I've been washing my own dishes for 8 years. Well, those days are over, she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. You deserve to be taken care of. Itan, that night, lying in bed, I stared at the ceiling thinking about what I'd overheard. Maybe I was being paranoid. Maybe their conversations had innocent explanations. John was probably just being thorough about financial planning, and Violet was probably just trying to figure out how to help me adjust to this new situation. But something felt wrong. The way they spoke when they thought I couldn't hear was so different from how they acted when we were together. And what did John mean about waiting for the right opportunity? I tried to push the thoughts away, but they kept circling back. For the first time since they'd arrived, I found myself wondering if their sudden appearance in my life was really about reconnecting as a family, or if there was something else driving their newfound concern for my well-being. The house that had felt so warm and alive just days before now felt different in the darkness. I could hear them moving around in their room, their voices too low to understand, but urgent in a way that made my chest tight with anxiety. Maybe tomorrow I'd feel differently. Maybe in the morning, with Violet making breakfast and John reading the paper at my kitchen table, everything would make sense again. But as I finally drifted off to sleep, one thought kept echoing in my mind. What exactly were they waiting for? 2 weeks had passed since Violet and John moved in, and the unease that had been growing in my chest was becoming harder to ignore. They'd taken over more of the house decisions, rearranging furniture, changing the cable package, even replacing my old coffee maker with some expensive machine that required special pods. When I mentioned that I liked my old one just fine, Violet laughed and said I get used to the new one. "Change is good for you, Dad," she'd said, like I was a child who needed to be taught how to live. I'd started taking longer walks just to get out of the house, to clear my head and try to make sense of what was happening. The neighborhood had always been quiet, mostly older folks like me who'd lived here for decades. There was a homeless man who sometimes sat by the bus stop at the corner. I'd seen him around for months, maybe longer. He was clean, polite when spoken to, and never bothered anyone. That Thursday afternoon, as I was walking back from the small grocery store 2 blocks away, I saw him sitting on the bench as usual. He looked up as I approached, and for the first time, he spoke directly to me. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "You live in the blue house with the white trim, don't you?" I stopped, surprised. "Yes, that's right." He stood up, and I could see he was younger than I'd thought, maybe in his 40s, with intelligent eyes that seemed out of place with his worn clothes and weathered face. "I don't mean to intrude," he said, glancing around nervously, "but I've been staying in the woods behind your street sometimes, and I've heard things that concern me." My pulse quickened. "What kind of things?" "Your daughter and her husband," he said, lowering his voice. "They sit on your back porch sometimes in the evenings, and their voices carry. I couldn't help but overhear some of their conversations." I felt my stomach drop. "What did you hear?" He looked uncomfortable, shifting from one foot to the other. "Maybe it's none of my business, but they were talking about you dying, about how they need to speed things up because they can't wait much longer." The words hit me like a physical blow. I had to steady myself against the bus stop sign. "Are you sure that's what they said?" "I'm sure," he said, his expression grave. "The woman, your daughter, she was saying something about how old people have accidents all the time, that no one would question it. The man was telling her to be patient, that they needed to be careful about timing." My hands were shaking. I tried to tell myself that maybe he'd misunderstood, that there could be another explanation. But deep down, I knew he was telling the truth. It explained everything. The sudden appearance, the overwhelming attention, the financial discussions, the way they spoke differently when they thought I couldn't hear. "There's more," the homeless man continued, his voice gentle but urgent. "They were talking about your money, about how once you're gone, they'll be set for life. The woman said something about not having to pretend to care about you much longer. I felt like I might be sick right there on the sidewalk. My own daughter, talking about my death like it was a business transaction." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He was quiet for a moment, looking down at his worn shoes. "My father was old when he died. He was alone, and I always regretted not being there for him, not protecting him when he needed it most. I couldn't live with myself if I heard something like this and didn't say anything. I looked at this stranger, this man who had nothing to gain by warning me, and realized he was showing me more genuine concern than my own daughter had. "What should I do?" I asked, feeling lost and afraid. "Be careful," he said simply. "Don't eat or drink anything they give you unless you're sure it's safe. Don't sign anything they put in front of you, and maybe consider getting out of that house for a while." I thanked him and walked home in a daze, my mind racing. When I opened the front door, Violet was in the kitchen preparing what looked like my afternoon medications. She'd started organizing my pills for me the week before, saying it would help me remember to take them. "There you are, Dad," she said with that bright smile that now seemed sinister. "I was wondering where you'd gotten to. I have your pills ready." I stared at the small cup containing 3 pills. I'd been taking the same 2 medications for years, but there were 3 pills in the cup. "What's the extra one?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Oh, John picked up something for your blood pressure. The pharmacist recommended it," she said, holding out the cup. I'd never mentioned having blood pressure problems to John. In fact, my blood pressure had been fine at my last doctor's appointment 6 months ago. "I think I'll skip them today," I said, setting the cup down on the counter. My stomach's been a little upset. Violet's smile faltered slightly. "Dad, you need to take your medications. You can't just skip them when you feel like it." "One day won't hurt," I said, backing away from the kitchen. "Jacob," John's voice came from behind me. I turned to see him standing in the doorway, his expression serious. "Violet's right. At your age, consistency with medication is crucial." The way he said, "at your age," reminded me of what the homeless man had told me. Old people have accidents all the time. I said, "I'm skipping them today," I repeated more firmly this time. John and Violet exchanged a look that lasted just a second too long. In that glance, I saw everything I needed to know. The homeless man was right. "Well," Violet said, her voice strained, "if you change your mind, they'll be right here on the counter." That evening at dinner, I barely touched my food. Every bite felt dangerous, every sip of water suspicious. Violet and John kept encouraging me to eat, saying I was looking thin, that I needed to keep my strength up. "You've barely eaten anything, Dad," Violet said, reaching over to cut my meat for me like I was an invalid. "This isn't like you." "I'm just not very hungry," I said. "Maybe you're coming down with something," John suggested. "There's been a flu going around. At your age, even a simple illness can be serious." There it was again, "at your age," like he was already planning my obituary. After dinner, I excused myself early, saying I was tired. As I headed upstairs, I heard them start talking in the living room, their voices low and urgent. I paused on the stairs, straining to listen. "He's acting strange," Violet was saying. "He wouldn't take his pills, barely ate anything." "Maybe he's getting suspicious," John replied. "We might need to move faster than we planned." "How much faster?" Violet asked. "I don't know. But we can't afford to have him start asking questions or getting other people involved." Other people, like the homeless man who'd warned me. What would they do if they knew someone else was aware of their plan? I made it to my bedroom and quietly closed the door, my heart pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it downstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed, trying to figure out what to do. I was 64 years old, alone except for the 2 people who wanted me dead, and I had no idea who to trust or where to turn. Margaret's jewelry box sat on my dresser, and I found myself looking at her picture inside it. "What would you do, Maggie?" I whispered to her smiling face. "How did we raise a daughter who could plan something like this?" But I knew Margaret would tell me the same thing the homeless man had said. "Be careful. Don't trust them. Get help." I looked out my bedroom window at the dark neighborhood below. Somewhere out there was a stranger who cared more about my well-being than my own child did. The irony was so bitter, it made my chest ache. Tomorrow, I decided, I would have to make some decisions. I couldn't keep living in this house, pretending everything was normal while my daughter and son-in-law planned my death. But I also couldn't just run without proof, without some way to protect myself from whatever they had planned. As I lay in bed that night, listening to their voices continue downstairs, I realized that the worst part wasn't that they wanted me dead. The worst part was that I finally understood how little I'd ever meant to my own daughter. The lottery hadn't brought her back to me. It had just given her a reason to pretend she cared long enough to get what she wanted. For the first time in my life, I was grateful to be planning to deceive my own child, because now I knew the truth about who she really was. I barely slept that night. Every sound in the house made me jump. Every creak of the floorboards could have been someone coming upstairs. When I finally heard Violet and John go to their room around midnight, I forced myself to lie still and wait until I was sure they were asleep. Around 2 in the morning, I quietly made my way downstairs. I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with, needed proof of what the homeless man had told me. The house was dark except for the glow from John's laptop, which he'd left open on the kitchen counter. My hand shook as I moved the mouse to wake up the screen. I'd never been good with computers, but I knew enough to look at the browser history. What I found made my blood run cold. The recent searches painted a terrifying picture. How to induce heart attack naturally, household accidents that look natural, elderly death statistics, inheritance laws when there's no will. And most chilling of all, how long do toxins stay in system after death? I stared at the screen, my worst fears confirmed. This wasn't just greed. This was premeditated murder. I took pictures with my old phone, though I wasn't sure the images would be clear enough to use as evidence. Then I carefully closed the laptop and crept back upstairs, my mind racing. The next morning, I pretended everything was normal. Violet made breakfast while John read the newspaper, and I forced myself to eat a piece of toast, though every bite felt like swallowing glass. "Dad, you still look pale," Violet said, studying my face with what I now recognized as fake concern. "Maybe we should call Dr. Peterson, have him take a look at you." Dr. Peterson had been my physician for 15 years. He knew my medical history better than anyone. If something happened to me, he'd be able to tell if it wasn't natural. "I'm fine," I said quickly. "Just tired." "At your age, you can't afford to ignore symptoms," John said, looking up from his paper. "A lot of serious conditions start with just feeling tired." There was that phrase again. At your age. Like a countdown timer, I couldn't see. After they both left the house, Violet to run errands, John to meet with someone about job prospects, I began my real investigation. I started in their bedroom, feeling like a criminal in my own home. In John's briefcase, I found documents that made my stomach turn. A life insurance policy they'd somehow taken out on me, naming Violet as the beneficiary. The amount was for $2 million. When had I signed this? I had no memory of it, but there was my signature at the bottom. Hidden beneath some clothes in Violet's suitcase, I found a small bottle of pills with no label. I'd never seen them before, but they looked similar to the third pill she'd tried to give me the day before. My hands trembled as I held the bottle, knowing these were probably meant to kill me. In the back of a notebook, I found what looked like a timeline written in Violet's handwriting. It was cryptic, but certain phrases stood out. 2 weeks to establish pattern. Month 3, increase frequency. Month 4, final phase. Today marked exactly 3 weeks since they'd arrived. The most damning evidence was a letter I found tucked inside John's laptop bag. It was a draft of my obituary, written as if I'd died peacefully in my sleep after a brief illness. They'd already planned my funeral, decided on cremation to destroy any evidence, and even picked out the flowers. Reading my own obituary, written by people who wanted me dead, was surreal. They'd made me sound like a loving father who'd been thrilled to reconnect with his daughter in his final months. The lies were so complete, so convincing, that I almost admired the thoroughness of their deception. I photographed everything I could, then carefully put it all back exactly where I'd found it. My phone was old, and the pictures weren't very clear, but it was something. That afternoon, while Violet was grocery shopping, I called my bank using the phone in my bedroom, speaking as quietly as possible. "I'd like to check on any recent changes to my accounts," I told the representative. "Let me see," she said. "It looks like you've added your daughter as a joint account holder and given power of attorney privileges to someone named John Morrison. These changes were made last Tuesday." My blood ran cold. I had never signed anything giving John power of attorney. I had never added Violet to my accounts. "Can you tell me what documentation was used for these changes?" I asked. "It shows we have signed authorization forms on file. Would you like me to email copies to you?" "Yes, please," I said, giving her my email address. When I checked my email an hour later, I stared at documents that bore my signature, but that I had never signed. The handwriting looked like mine, but I knew I'd never seen these papers before. They'd forged my signature. I was still staring at the computer screen when I heard Violet's car in the driveway. I quickly deleted the emails and cleared the browser history, my heart pounding as I tried to act normal. "How was your afternoon, Dad?" Violet asked as she brought in grocery bags. "Fine," I managed, "just reading." She started unpacking groceries, and I noticed she'd bought more of the pill organizers, the kind she'd been using to give me my daily medications. She'd also bought vitamins and supplements I'd never heard of. "I thought we could get you on a better health regimen," she said, holding up bottles of various pills. "John researched the best supplements for men your age." Men my age who were supposed to die soon, I thought grimly. That evening, I made an excuse about feeling unwell and went to bed early. But instead of sleeping, I sat by my bedroom window, watching the street. Around 9 o'clock, I saw the homeless man walking past under the streetlight. I made a decision that would have seemed impossible a month ago. I quietly opened my bedroom window and waved to get his attention. He looked up, surprised, and I motioned for him to come to the backyard. Meeting him by the back fence, I felt like I was living in some kind of spy movie, but this stranger had already shown me more genuine concern than my own family. "You were right," I whispered. "They're planning to kill me." His expression was grim but not surprised. "Do you have proof?" I showed him some of the photos on my phone, though they were hard to see in the darkness. Computer searches, pills, life insurance, forged documents. They've been planning this for months, maybe longer. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "They have control of my bank accounts now. If I go to the police, what if they don't believe me? What if Violet and John convince them I'm just a confused old man?" "Do you have somewhere safe to go?" he asked. I thought about it. My few friends were all elderly like me, and I couldn't put them in danger. I had a sister in Florida, but we hadn't spoken in years. Most of my neighbors barely knew me. "Not really," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "There's a shelter downtown, but it's not the kind of place for someone like you. Give me a day or two. I might know someone who can help." "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "You don't even know me." "Because it's right," he said simply, "and because no one should die alone and afraid, especially not at the hands of people who are supposed to love them." As I crept back into the house, I realized that this homeless stranger had become my only ally. The irony was devastating. I was a millionaire, but the only person I could trust was someone who had nothing. I lay in bed that night, listening to Violet and John talking downstairs, their voices too low to understand. But I didn't need to hear the words anymore. I knew what they were planning. The question now was whether I could stay alive long enough to stop them. Tomorrow, I decided, I would have to start fighting back. I couldn't keep playing the role of the trusting father while they planned my murder, but I also couldn't let them know I was onto them, not until I had a way to protect myself. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt something other than fear and sadness. I felt angry. They'd stolen my joy in winning the lottery, poisoned what should have been a blessing, and most unforgivably, they'd made me doubt the love I'd always felt for my daughter. That anger was going to keep me alive. I was sure of it. 3 days after my conversation with the homeless man, everything came to a head in the worst possible way. I'd been pretending to take the pills Violet gave me, hiding them under my tongue and spitting them out later. I'd been avoiding eating anything they prepared when I wasn't watching, but my careful act was apparently slipping. That Friday morning, I could feel the tension in the house like electricity before a storm. Violet's smiles seemed more forced, and John kept watching me with calculating eyes. They whispered more frequently, stopping abruptly whenever I entered a room. I was sitting in the living room after lunch, pretending to read, when I heard John on the phone in the kitchen. His voice was more urgent than usual. "We can't wait any longer," he was saying. "He's getting suspicious. Yesterday he asked me directly why there were 3 pills instead of 2. My blood ran cold. I'd been more careful than I thought, but apparently not careful enough. "Tonight," John continued, "we'll make it look like a heart attack. Natural for someone his age, especially with all the stress of sudden wealth." I heard Violet's voice, though I couldn't make out her words. Then John again. "The pills will do it. Enough to stop his heart, but they'll be out of his system by the time anyone finds him. We just need to make sure he takes them." My hands started shaking so badly I nearly dropped my book. Tonight. They were planning to kill me tonight. I forced myself to sit still, to keep breathing normally, while my mind raced. I needed to get out of the house, but I couldn't just leave without them knowing something was wrong. I needed a plan. Around 3 o'clock, I told them I was going for my usual walk. Violet seemed reluctant to let me go. "Maybe you should rest today, Dad," she said. "You've seemed tired lately." "Fresh air helps," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll just go to the corner and back." Instead of my usual route, I went straight to where the homeless man usually sat. He wasn't there, but an older woman at the bus stop said she'd seen him earlier that morning heading toward the downtown area. I felt panic rising in my chest. My one ally was gone, and I was running out of time. I walked quickly to the small grocery store and used their payphone to call the police. "I need to report a planned murder," I said when someone answered. "Sir, can you tell me your location and the nature of the emergency?" I explained everything as quickly as I could. The lottery money, my daughter and son-in-law moving in, the overheard conversations, the computer searches, the forged documents. As I spoke, I could hear how crazy it all sounded. "Sir, do you have physical evidence of these threats?" the dispatcher asked. "I have photos on my phone, but they're not very clear, and I found pills they were trying to give me." "Are you in immediate danger right now?" "They're planning to do it tonight," I said. "Please, you have to believe me. We'll send an officer to check on the situation. What's your address?" I gave them my address and hung up, feeling slightly relieved. But as I walked home, doubt crept in. What if the police didn't believe me? What if Violet and John convinced them I was just a confused old man having paranoid delusions? When I got back to the house, John was waiting in the living room with a serious expression. "Jacob, we need to talk," he said. Violet emerged from the kitchen, and I noticed she was carrying my evening pills. It was barely 4 o'clock, hours before I usually took them. "Dad, sit down," Violet said, her voice gentle but firm. "John and I are worried about you." "Oh," I remained standing, every instinct telling me to run. "Worried about what?" "Your behavior lately," John said. "The paranoia, the suspicious looks, refusing to take your medications. These can be signs of dementia or other cognitive issues." "I don't have dementia," I said. "Dad, denial is part of the condition," Violet said sadly. "We think you need professional help. John has been researching facilities that specialize in elderly care." The word facilities sent a chill down my spine. They were trying to have me committed, probably to gain full control of my money and make me disappear without anyone asking questions. "I'm not going anywhere," I said firmly. John stood up, moving closer. "Jacob, you don't really have a choice. We have power of attorney now. Remember, we can make medical decisions for you." "I never gave you power of attorney," I said, backing toward the front door. Violet's mask finally slipped completely. Her concerned expression vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. "Dad, you signed the papers, don't you remember?" "I never signed anything," I said. "You forged my signature." The silence that followed was deafening. John and Violet looked at each other, and I saw them make a decision without speaking. "Dad," Violet said, her voice now completely different, flat, emotionless. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." "Making what harder?" I asked, though I already knew. "Sit down and take your pills," John said, no longer bothering to sound friendly. "It'll be easier for everyone." "No," I said, reaching for the door handle. John moved faster than I expected for someone his size. He grabbed my arm, his grip tight enough to bruise. "You're not leaving, Jacob." "Let go of me," I said, trying to pull away. "Dad, stop fighting us," Violet said, approaching with the pills and a glass of water. "We're trying to help you." "Help me die, you mean?" I said, the words finally out in the open. Violet's eyes went completely cold. "You were never supposed to figure it out. You were supposed to be the grateful father, happy to have his family back, taking his pills like a good patient." "Why?" I asked, my voice breaking. "I'm your father. I gave you everything I could." "You gave me nothing," Violet spat. "You were weak, absent, always letting Mom make the decisions. When she died, I thought I was finally free of you. And then you had to go and win the lottery. So you decided to kill me for it?" John tightened his grip on my arm. $37 million, Jacob. "You really think you deserve it more than we do? You're going to die anyway in a few years. We just helped speed up the timeline." I looked at my daughter, searching for any trace of the little girl I'd once pushed on swings and helped with homework. There was nothing there but greed and contempt. "The homeless man heard you," I said desperately. "He knows what you're planning." Violet laughed, a sound devoid of any warmth. "You mean that crazy person who lives in the woods? Who's going to believe him? Besides, by tomorrow morning, you'll be dead and we'll be grieving your sudden heart attack." "The police are coming," I said. "I called them." John's expression darkened. "When?" 20 minutes ago. They should be here soon." Violet's composure finally cracked. "You stupid old man. Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I've saved my own life," I said. John released my arm suddenly, and I stumbled backward against the door. He was looking out the window, and I could see the tension in his shoulders. "There's a police car pulling up," he said. Violet's face went white. "What do we do?" "We stick to the story," John said quickly. "He's confused, possibly having a breakdown. We're concerned family members trying to help." The doorbell rang, and I felt a surge of relief so strong my knees nearly buckled. I opened the door to find two police officers, a middle-aged man and a younger woman. "Mr. Holloway," the male officer said, "we received a call about a possible threat." "Yes," I said, stepping aside to let them in. "My daughter and son-in-law are trying to kill me." Behind me, I heard Violet let out a sob. "Officers, I'm so sorry you had to come out here. My father has been having episodes lately. We think he might be developing dementia." "Sir," the female officer said to me, "can you tell us specifically what threats have been made?" I explained everything again, the overheard conversations, the computer searches, the forged documents, the pills. As I spoke, I watched the officers' expressions, trying to gauge whether they believed me. "These are very serious accusations," the male officer said. "Do you have any physical evidence?" I showed them the photos on my phone. They were blurry and hard to make out, but one of the computer searches was visible. I also gave them the unmarked pills I'd been hiding in my pocket. "We'll need to take these for testing," the female officer said, placing the pills in an evidence bag. "Officers," John said, stepping forward with his practiced charm, "Jacob has been under a lot of stress since winning the lottery. We moved in to help him, but his behavior has become increasingly erratic." "Have you threatened Mr. Holloway in any way?" the male officer asked. "Of course not," Violet said, tears streaming down her face. "He's my father. I love him. It breaks my heart to see him like this." I watched my daughter perform, and I realized she was probably good enough to convince them. The tears looked real. The pain in her voice sounded genuine. If I didn't know better, I might have believed her myself. "Mr. Holloway," the female officer said, "would you be willing to come with us tonight? We can arrange for somewhere safe for you to stay while we investigate these claims." I looked at Violet and John, seeing the barely controlled panic in their eyes. They knew that if I left with the police, their plan was finished. "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I want to leave with you right now." As I walked out of my house with the police officers, I heard Violet calling after me, "Dad, please, don't do this. We're your family. We love you." But I didn't look back. I couldn't, because I finally understood that family wasn't about blood or obligation. It was about love, genuine care, protection. And the people who had given me that weren't the ones who shared my DNA. They were a homeless stranger who had nothing to gain by warning me, and two police officers who took an old man's fears seriously enough to investigate. As the police car pulled away from my house, I felt something I hadn't experienced in weeks: safety. For the first time since winning the lottery, I wasn't afraid to fall asleep. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight I was alive, and that was enough. 6 months later, I was sitting on the porch of a small house I'd rented 3 towns over, watching the sun rise and drinking coffee that I'd made myself, with no one to tell me it wasn't the right kind or that I needed to try something new. The silence was peaceful now, not lonely. There's a difference between being alone and being free, and I'd finally learned what that meant. The investigation had taken 3 months to complete. The pills Violet had been giving me tested positive for a combination of heart medication and blood thinners that, in the doses they contained, would have killed me within hours of taking them. The computer searches on John's laptop provided additional evidence, and when the police dug deeper, they found that this wasn't their first attempt at insurance fraud. John had been married twice before, and both wives had died under suspicious circumstances. Violet and John were arrested and charged with attempted murder, fraud, and conspiracy. The forged power of attorney documents were evidence of identity theft. Violet's lawyer tried to argue that she was manipulated by John, that she was as much a victim as I was. But the prosecution had recordings from wiretaps they'd placed in my house after my initial report, conversations where Violet had been the one pushing for faster action, worried that I was becoming suspicious. During the trial, I had to sit in a courtroom and listen to my daughter's lawyer describe me as a neglectful father who had driven his child to desperation. They painted a picture of a selfish man who had ignored his family until he suddenly had money, then expected them to be grateful for his attention. Some of it was true. I hadn't been the father I should have been. I'd been passive, distant, content to let Margaret handle the emotional work of raising our daughter. But that didn't justify murder. The hardest part was when Violet testified in her own defense. She sat there in a conservative dress, looking small and vulnerable, and told the court that she'd only wanted to take care of me, that John had convinced her the pills were vitamins, that she'd never meant any harm. I almost believed her myself. For a moment, watching her on the witness stand, I saw the little girl who used to crawl into my lap when she had nightmares. But then the prosecutor played one of the wiretap recordings, and the jury heard Violet's voice saying, "The old bastard is taking too long to die. Maybe we need to increase the dose." That was the moment I finally let go of the daughter I'd thought I had and accepted the truth about who she really was. Violet was sentenced to 15 years in prison. John got 25, largely because of the evidence about his previous wives. The life insurance policy was voided, and I was able to regain control of my finances, though it took months of legal work to undo all the damage they'd done. The homeless man who had saved my life turned out to be named Robert Chen. He'd been a software engineer before a series of personal tragedies had left him on the streets. When I tried to thank him after the trial, he brushed off my gratitude like it was nothing. "Anyone would have done the same thing," he said. "No," I told him. "They wouldn't have. Most people would have minded their own business." I asked Robert if he wanted help getting back on his feet, but he declined any charity. What he did accept was a job. I'd started a small nonprofit organization focused on providing services to homeless individuals, and Robert became my first employee. He understood the community in ways I never could, and his work helped dozens of people find housing, jobs, and medical care. Working with Robert taught me something important about family. He'd lost touch with his blood relatives years ago, but he'd created a network of people on the streets who looked out for each other, shared resources, and offered support without expecting anything in return. That was more like a family than anything I'd experienced in my own house. The lottery money, which had seemed like such a blessing and then such a curse, finally became what it was supposed to be, an opportunity. I kept enough to live comfortably, but not extravagantly. The rest went into the nonprofit and into helping people who, like Robert, had been forgotten by everyone else. I never went back to my old house. I couldn't bear to walk through those rooms where my daughter had planned my death while pretending to care about my well-being. I sold it and used the money to buy a small building downtown that served as headquarters for the nonprofit. My new house was smaller, simpler, but it felt like home in a way the old place never had. I had neighbors who knew my name and checked on me when they hadn't seen me for a few days. I had work that felt meaningful. I had friends who chose to spend time with me because they enjoyed my company, not because they wanted something from me. About a year after the trial, I received a letter from Violet in prison. I almost threw it away without reading it, but curiosity got the better of me. The letter was 3 pages of self-justification and blame. She was sorry I felt hurt, but I had to understand her perspective. She'd grown up feeling neglected and unloved. John had taken advantage of her emotional vulnerabilities. The stress of my sudden wealth had made her temporarily lose her judgment. She hoped someday I could forgive her and that we could rebuild our relationship. Not once in those 3 pages did she actually apologize for trying to kill me. Not once did she take full responsibility for her choices. Even in prison, she was still trying to manipulate me, still trying to play the victim. I wrote back a single sentence: "You are not my daughter anymore." Then I threw both letters in the trash and never looked back. People sometimes ask me if I'm angry about what happened, if I feel bitter about losing my daughter this way. The truth is, I'm not angry anymore. Anger requires caring about someone, and I don't care about Violet anymore. She's a stranger who shares some of my DNA, nothing more. What I feel is grateful. Grateful to Robert for having the courage to warn me. Grateful to the police officers who took me seriously. Grateful for the chance to discover what real family looks like. People who choose to love and support each other without ulterior motives. Last month, Robert got married to a woman he met through our job training program. They asked me to walk him down the aisle since his own father had died years ago. Standing there in that small church, watching two people who had found love after losing everything, I felt prouder than I ever had as Violet's father. The lottery gave me $37 million, but it cost me the illusion that blood relations guarantee love. In the end, that was the best trade I ever made. This morning, as I sit on my porch watching the world wake up, I think about how different my life looks now compared to a year ago. Then I was alone in a big house, desperate for any connection to family, no matter how hollow. Now I'm alone in a small house, but surrounded by people who genuinely care about my well-being. My phone rings, and I see Robert's name on the screen. "Good morning, Jacob," he says. "Are you still planning to come to dinner Sunday? Maria's making her famous enchiladas." "Wouldn't miss it," I tell him. After I hang up, I sit back in my chair and smile. Sunday dinner with people who want me there because they enjoy my company, not because they want something from me. That's what winning the lottery really gave me, the chance to discover what family is supposed to feel like. Violet took my money, forged my documents, and tried to kill me. But in the end, she did me a favor. She forced me to learn the difference between being related to someone and being loved by them. And now, at 65 years old, I finally know what it feels like to be part of a real family. Not the one I was born into, or the one I helped create, but the one I chose for myself. That's the kind of wealth no lottery ticket can buy, and no amount of greed can steal away.